The cameras were rolling on what seemed like another routine Family Feud taping when 74-year-old Frank Miller shuffled onto the stage wearing a simple security guard uniform that had seen better days. But what this quiet man was about to reveal would leave Steve Harvey speechless and prove that sometimes the greatest heroes hide behind the most ordinary uniforms. It was a Thursday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta, and Steve Harvey was in his element. That perfectly tailored navy suit, contrasting sharply with the Miller family's modest appearance. The Miller clan from small-town Ohio was facing off against the Thompson family from Texas, and everything seemed set for another heartwarming episode about hard-working American families. But Frank Miller wasn't just any security guard. He stood at the family podium with the ramrod straight posture of someone who had known discipline, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in a stance that seemed almost military, though his humble demeanor suggested a man who had never known glory. When Steve introduced the family during the opening segment, Frank's responses painted a picture of quiet service. "So Frank," Steve had said during introductions, "tell us about your work." "Well, Mr. Steve," Frank had replied in his soft, measured voice that carried just a hint of authority, "I work security at a small shopping center. Been keeping folks safe for about 15 years now." 15 years? That's dedication, man. What did you do before that? Frank had paused, looking down at his worn security badge. "I was in the service for a while. Nothing special. Just did my time and came home." Steve noticed something in Frank's answer. It was humble in a way that suggested either modesty or something deeper. The phrase "nothing special" didn't quite match the military bearing Frank couldn't quite shake, even in civilian clothes. The game progressed normally for the first 2 rounds. The Miller family was doing well, with Frank surprising everyone by showing an unexpected knowledge of military terms and historical events. But it was during the 3rd round, when the category was things that make someone a hero, that Frank's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Steve asked the question, "Name something a hero might receive for their bravery." It was Frank's turn at the podium. He stepped forward slowly, his worn security shoes making crisp sounds on the studio floor. And for a moment his civilian slouch disappeared entirely, replaced by the bearing of a soldier. "A medal," Frank said quietly, but there was something in his voice, a weight, a knowledge, a history that made the simple answer feel profound. "A medal," Steve announced enthusiastically. "Good answer, Frank. Let's see how many people said medal." The board revealed it was the number 1 answer. The Miller family celebrated, but Steve noticed Frank wasn't sharing in their excitement. Instead, the old security guard was staring at the floor with an expression that seemed almost pained. "Frank, you okay there, buddy?" Steve asked, approaching the podium. That's when Frank looked up, and Steve saw something in his eyes that changed everything. Not the contentment of a security guard who had found peace in quiet service, but the complex burden of someone carrying memories too heavy for ordinary conversation. "Mr. Steve," Frank said, his voice barely audible, "can I tell you something about medals?" The studio fell quiet. There was something in Frank's tone that commanded attention. Something that suggested they were about to venture into territory far more serious than game show entertainment. "Of course, Frank. What's on your mind?" Frank took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening in a way that transformed his entire presence. "I said I knew nothing special about the service, but that wasn't exactly true." Steve's eyebrows raised. "How so?" "When I said I served for a while," Frank paused, his weathered hands gripping the podium. "It was Korea. 19. The audience leaned forward. Steve sensed they were approaching something significant, something that would transform this ordinary game show moment into something profound. "Korea," Steve repeated, walking closer to Frank. "Frank, that was serious business. Real war." Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories he'd been keeping for 70 years. "Hill 255, Frank said simply. "February 14, 1953. Valentine's Day." Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of contestants, heard thousands of stories, but this was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The way Frank spoke those words, the date, the hill number, it was clear they weren't just facts. They were coordinates to a moment that had defined a young man's life. "Frank," Steve said gently, "what happened on Hill?" Frank looked out at his family, then back at Steve. His daughter was leaning forward, hearing details she'd never been told. His grandson was staring with newfound respect at the grandfather he'd thought was just a simple security guard. "Chinese forces had our company surrounded," Frank began, his voice growing stronger with each word. 200 Chinese soldiers, 43 Americans. We were cut off for 6 days. No supplies, no reinforcements, no way out. The studio was completely silent. This wasn't game show content anymore. This was living history. On the 6th day, they made their final push. We were down to 11 men still fighting. I was a sergeant then, 21 years old, and I had to make a choice. Steve stopped moving entirely. "What choice, Frank?" "Leave the wounded behind and try to escape with the men who could still walk. Or," Frank's voice caught slightly, "or go back for them." "What did you do?" Frank straightened to his full height, and suddenly the security guard was gone, replaced entirely by the soldier he'd once been. "I went back 4 times, each time through enemy fire. 89 men made it off that hill alive because somebody decided that American soldiers don't get left behind." The studio erupted in gasps. Steve's mouth fell open. The Miller family was staring at Frank as if seeing him for the first time. 89 men, Steve repeated. "Frank, you saved 89 soldiers?" "I did what any soldier would do," Frank said quietly. But Steve was just getting started in understanding the magnitude of Frank's heroism. "Frank, what happened after Korea? Did the army recognize what you did?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. "There was some ceremony, some paperwork, nothing important." Steve's instincts told him there was much more to this story. "Frank, what kind of ceremony?" The old soldier looked at Steve with eyes that had seen too much and said too little for too long. "They gave me a medal, Mr. Steve. Said it was for going above and beyond." "What medal, Frank?" Frank was quiet for so long that Steve thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "The Medal of Honor." The studio exploded. The audience gasped audibly. Steve's signature stop gesture went up as he processed what he'd just heard. The Miller family was staring at Frank in complete shock. "The Medal of Honor," Steve repeated, his voice rising. "Frank, you're a Medal of Honor recipient?" Frank nodded slowly, as if admitting to something he'd rather keep hidden. Steve began pacing, his mind racing. "Frank, do you understand what you just told me? The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration in the United States. It's given for conspicuous gallantry above and the call of duty." "I know what it is," Frank said quietly. "Frank, your family, do they know?" Frank shook his head. "They know I served in Korea. They don't know the details." The cameras caught Steve's expression changing from amazement to something deeper, a recognition that he was standing in the presence of living history, of heroism so extraordinary that it had been hidden for 70 years behind a security guard's uniform. But what Frank revealed next would prove that his war heroism was just the beginning of his extraordinary story. "Mr. Steve," Frank continued, "there's something else. Something I've never told anyone." Steve stopped pacing. "What's that, Frank?" "After the war, I came home and tried to live a normal life. Got married, had kids, worked regular jobs. But I couldn't forget those men. The ones we saved, and the ones we could." Steve sensed they were approaching something even deeper. "For 50 years I've been tracking down the families of the soldiers who didn't make it home. Finding their children, their grandchildren, making sure they know their fathers died heroes." The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had made a career of quick wit and perfect timing, was speechless. "How many families, Frank?" 14 families across 7 states. I visit them every year on the anniversary. I tell them about their father's last days, how brave they were, how much they loved their families back home. Steve removed his Navy suit jacket and walked to Frank. Without a word, he draped it around the old soldier's shoulders. "Frank," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just serve your country in Korea. You've been serving those families for 50 years. But Frank wasn't finished. The decades of silence were crumbling, and more of his story emerged. "There's one more thing, Mr. Steve. The reason I came on this show." Steve, still processing everything he'd learned, looked at Frank expectantly. "My grandson Tommy, he's been getting picked on at school. Kids saying his grandfather is just a security guard, nothing special. I thought, maybe if I won some money on your show, I'd take him somewhere nice, show him that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." Steve Harvey knelt down in front of Frank Miller, right there on the Family Feud stage, in front of millions of viewers. "Frank," Steve said, "your grandson doesn't need you to win money to prove you're extraordinary. He needs to know that his grandfather is a Medal of Honor recipient who saved 89 lives and has spent 50 years honoring the memory of fallen soldiers." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. But Steve had one more surprise for Frank. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced to the studio and television audience, "I'm going to do something I've never done before. Frank Miller, you don't need to play this game to prove anything. You've already proven more than most people could in 10 lifetimes." Steve pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Pentagon Veterans Affairs, this is Steve Harvey from Family Feud. I need to speak with someone about honoring a very special Medal of Honor recipient." Within minutes, a representative from the Department of Veterans Affairs was on speakerphone, confirming what Frank had been too modest to emphasize. He was one of only 31 living Medal of Honor recipients, and his actions on Hill 255 were legendary among military historians. "Sergeant Miller," came the voice through the speakers, "your service record shows extraordinary valor. 89 soldiers owe their lives to your actions. You are what we call a soldier's soldier." The episode that aired became one of the most watched in Family Feud history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about hidden heroes and the veterans living quietly among us. Frank's story inspired the creation of the Hidden Heroes Foundation, which helps identify and honor veterans whose extraordinary service had gone recognized. Tommy Miller, Frank's grandson, became the foundation's youngest advocate, traveling with his grandfather to speak at schools about the heroes who walk among us every day. Today, Frank Miller still works security at the same shopping center, but now he does it without the burden of secrecy. His Medal of Honor hangs proudly in his modest home, and every February 14th, families across 7 states receive visits from the man who made sure their father's sacrifices would never be forgotten. Steve Harvey often tells the story of Frank Miller when he speaks about unexpected heroism. "I thought I was meeting a security guard," Steve says. "Instead, I met one of America's greatest living heroes, wearing a uniform he'd earned through service most of us can't imagine." The jacket Steve gave Frank that day hangs next to his Medal of Honor. But more importantly, it represents something profound: the idea that heroism often comes disguised as ordinary service. That the greatest among us often ask us the least recognition, and that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who never mentions his power at all. Frank Miller proved that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear security guard uniforms, keep quiet about their medals, and spend 50 years making sure the world remembers the soldiers who didn't come home.